Today, we're talking about something that, from what I've seen so far, is flying under the radar for a lot of regular gamers out there getting revved about the Nintendo Switch 2, but who don't necessarily nerd out on all the technical details. But it is something they really need to be paying attention to, or they're gonna get boned on launch day and get very upset and frustrated. And it's all part of the secret sauce that helps the Switch 2 make the kinds of performance leaps it needs to. And it's all tied in to the new standard for the user upgradable storage, the MicroSD Express standard. And if you're out there imagining you can just yoink the same MicroSD card you've got in your original Switch and chuck it in the Switch 2, I'm about to ruin your day. Because no, you will not be moving that thing from your OG Switch across to the Switch 2. It's simply not going to work properly. And no, it's not because of corporate greed, which is the brain dead shit I've been seeing increasingly thrown around at every and any change that people don't understand about the Switch 2. Well, they did it for corporate greed reasons. Blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to help spread some understanding and tell you all why you've got to buy yet another new thing to make your Switch 2 experience the best it possibly can be, which, yes, very annoying, but there is legitimately a good excuse far beyond corporate greed, which is a thing we need to be mad about. Don't get me wrong. I'm the first to shake my fist at corporate greed bullshit. I've done it for years. Regulars around here will tell you. But it's not the excuse for this one. So let's take a walk down that road and see what's up. Hello again, I am Blunty. And in a recent video, I had a segment breaking down a little how silly it is for people to use the PlayStation 4 as a touchstone for expectations of relative game performance and a representation of what you might expect on the Nintendo Switch 2 as far as it comes to how it runs games. Like, it's just really silly and desperately uninformed for the full picture about how basic shit works as a whole instead of just thinking purely about a single component, like, say, for example, a GPU in isolation of everything else. So let's start there. Any PC gamer who has built their own rig, for example, knows full well how a single poorly chosen component can massively bottleneck your gaming performance. Sure, CPU and GPU power are vital, top of the list to get the best ones you can possibly fit into your budget, but if you cheap out elsewhere and pair it with, say, slow-ass RAM, you've hamstrung your game performance noticeably there. One decision. Try running your games off a mechanical hard drive like this one. Sure, maybe it's a nice high-end model from a trusted brand that's been around for decades, and it's 8 friggin' terabytes, big and large enough for every game you have ever purchased on Steam. It sounds like an excellent choice for your new gaming rig, but actually it's made for long-term NAS use, and it's far too slow to keep up with the kinds of data streaming an ever-increasing number of modern games need to just work properly. No, my friends, you need to think of the whole thing as a concert, not just pay attention to the string section and get the best string section you can possibly get and cheap out on the wins. It's not going to... That metaphor fell apart on me a little bit. You know what I mean though, right? One of the things I pointed out in that other video was the immense difference that Nintendo Switch 2's new storage arrangements will be making to overall performance and its capability to run certain types of games at all. So here's the deal with that. The original Nintendo Switch and the Switch OLED and the Switch Lite all used microSD cards. We all know this. You probably got one because the inbuilt storage is limited. Thanks, Nintendo. And Nintendo even teamed up with one of the leading brands in storage to make some special Nintendo branded ones, which if you bought one of these, you paid a premium for that big red logo on there and not much else. You could have got the exact same thing, and I mean exactly the same thing from the same manufacturer for cheaper anyway. So that was a bit silly of you. Let's not make the mistake this time around. Now, microSD cards have been around for a very long time now, and as technology marched on in various devices, like, say, GoPro cameras, for example, needed faster and faster data speeds and larger capacities to keep up with high quality, high frame rate, high bitrate 4K and above video and whatnot, well, new standards of microSD cards were produced to meet that particular need of bigger, faster, better. The SD cards that the original Switch were compatible with were from the relatively basic and slow microSDs with capacities up to 2 gigabytes. It also supported microSD HC, faster and up to 32 gigabytes, and microSD XC cards, the fastest option with the highest capacities and frankly your best option for actually running games flawlessly and with decent loading times. But the Switch 2 is going all in on a new standard called MicroSD Express. And when I say new, well, it's been around for a few years now, but it's still quite uncommon. Because frankly, not many devices need its full capabilities and can get away with using the older, slower, more broadly available standards. But the Switch 2 needs the new ones to work properly, as it is the only standard of microSD card that's fast enough to match the onboard storage performance, meaning you need it to be that fast for games to load and run correctly, or at all. Tons of games these days load far more assets in real time, more constantly, more consistently than ever before, especially when it comes to open world games like Cyberpunk, for example. So if Nintendo want to keep attracting modern titles and third-party ports, they need faster storage, not just internally, but for expandable memory too, and that's where the MicroSD Express comes in. It is the exact same reason the PlayStation 5 needs those fancy Gen 4 M.2 drives for its own expanded storage, and why the Xbox uses that proprietary storage thing, which, surprise, internally isn't much more than a standard M.2 drive itself anyway. They all needed to closely match the speeds of the built-in internal storage that game developers target, for expected and predictable data streaming performance, to make sure their games run as intended. So, of course, if you want to be able to install your games on expanded storage, you need that expanded storage to match that performance. Otherwise, things don't work. Makes sense, right? Simple. Now, the real-world data read speeds you could expect from the kinds of microSD cards the original Switch uses would be around 100 megabits a second tops. On paper, it's up to 300 megabits a second, but really that was only on paper. In the real world, things work a little bit differently for various technical reasons we don't need to get into. And internally, the original Switch used a type of flash memory called eMMC 5.1, which itself topped out at about 300 megabits a second in real-world conditions. Internally, the Switch 2 uses something called UFS, or Universal Flash Storage. That's a type of very fast solid-state storage that a lot of PC SSDs and M.2 drives include as part of how they work. So to complement that, the microSD card the Switch 2 needs in order to keep up with its internal storage speeds are the MicroSD Express cards. Now, these new cards are physically nearly identical to the older MicroSD cards, almost exactly the same, in fact, to help devices that might need to be able to also be compatible with older standards of MicroSD cards to use the same slot. Just simplifies things, making it that way. But the next bit gets a little more nerdy, but don't worry, you don't really need to fully grasp it all. I just want to include it here for full context. But these new MicroSD Express cards are very different in how they operate internally. See, the older MicroSD cards operated over what is called a UHS bus. That's just the technology they use to talk to other bits and pieces. It's like a middleman for data, basically. But the newer MicroSD Express cards don't use a data bus like that at all as a middleman. Instead, they connect directly to the PCIe 3 interface in very much the same way that an M.2 SSD drive does in your PC, or indeed the other consoles. And once more, the Switch does this for exactly the same reasons as they do it. The big difference here is because the Switch is designed to be compact and as small as possible, it's not really practical to use M.2 drives and stuff. Just making room for those and adding in the interface and slot and having a removal back for people to do that, that's not a very Nintendo thing to do, and it's not going to keep the device as small as they want it. So they had to use the next best option, which is these new microSD cards. MicroSD Express uses just one lane of PCIe 3's 16 in total, and from that it can gobble up to 1 gigabit a second, which, would you like to do some quick math on how many times faster that is than the 100 megabits a second of the Switch 1's microSD cards? It's 10 times faster. And it is that which is one of the keys to Switch 2's performance capabilities, and indeed why I brought it up in the Cyberpunk video in the first place about how stupid it is for people to use the PS4 as a comparison point for performance at all, because the PS4 had a mechanical hard drive, and an especially slow one at that. Even by the standards of the day, it was considered slow, with barely more bandwidth than the original Switch's own SD cards at 116.5 megabits a second, best case. But in the real world, it was commonly more like 40 megabits a second. And you don't need much imagination to see how massively that affects load times, open world data streaming, or even simple installs. There was a reason quite a lot of people modded their PlayStation 4s to have SSDs in them to help with that crap. But of course the SSD wasn't a standard component of the PS4, so developers couldn't really plan on people having that, so it only really helped with load times and install times and stuff. Now then, when Cyberpunk 2077 got its 2.0 update, and a little later the Phantom Liberty DLC, its required specs were changed from having a minimum spec accepting hard drive installs to requiring an SSD, and that was purely down to the data streaming performance needed to make the game run properly and as intended. I mean, even when the game first launched, the hard drive support was pretty flaky anyway, and it was only there as a last-ditch effort, and there was a special toggle for it in the menus and everything. But this was one of a few reasons the PlayStation 4 and its generational cousin, the Xbox One X, never got the 2.0 update for Cyberpunk and were deemed incapable of running the Phantom Liberty expansion. Like, CDPR said that. Meanwhile, the Switch 2 version can and indeed will run Phantom Liberty and indeed comes with Phantom Liberty DLC pre-installed. So even if you could directly compare the pure isolated GPU performance alone of the Switch 2's GPU to the PlayStation 4's, it's a long, long way from the full story of what the Switch 2 is capable of. Because, say it with me now, the components work in concert. So, with the internal storage speed being one of the few key components of overall performance and enabling larger, more expansive, more ambitious games than the Switch 2 was ever capable of, and the inherent need to keep performance parity between the internal solid-state storage and the user expandable storage to make sure, whether a game is installed internally or on the MicroSD Express card, you get exactly the same performance, or at least extremely close to, without noticeable bottlenecks and no compromises or compatibility issues and the like. They needed to restrict storage to this new type and this new type only, which is why they're not supporting the older cards, even though technically the standard, which MicroSD Express belongs to, can be backwards compatible. So, that brings us to availability. Sadly, right now, the MicroSD Express cards are a little bit hard to get, with only 2 or 3 brands, or 2 or 3 trustworthy brands, that I would trust at least, offering options available for sale. And they do tend to ask a little higher price for the same kind of capacities the older, slower cards would sell cheaper for. So, it's a pain point for consumers. Absolutely, yes. It's not fun. And it will absolutely confuse a lot of normies out there, because the difference between MicroSD SD, MicroSD XC, MicroSD Express, all that sort of stuff, and the way these things are labeled, because there are like 4 different labeling standards for 4 different kinds of things about these MicroSD cards, UHC1, UHC2, all that kind of stuff. It gets very confusing for even the well-informed people, and you can be damn sure that every time I've needed to order an SD card for something, a camera most likely, I double, triple, quadruple check exactly which card I've ordered and whether or not it's the one I need to support the things I need to do. So no, you cannot, not just should not, but cannot use your old SD cards, but it is all for a good cause. So it's one of those suck it up moments that happens every once in a while in generational leaps sometimes. And the Switch 2 does come with a healthier inbuilt storage at 256 gigabytes to start with, so not everyone's going to need an SD card right at launch like many of us needed to with the original Switch and its pathetic amount of pre-installed storage. And you have to remember the prices on these cards will drop as the tech becomes more widespread. Certainly more brands will want to capitalize on Nintendo's popularity and market penetration and sell you more of these things, so there'll be more options on the market, which will hopefully help keep prices under cap as well. But that's kind of a wait and see thing. The world's a little bit unpredictable right now when it comes to tech and prices. So, whee! Now, I have left an Amazon affiliate link to a compatible option from a brand that I myself have been trusting for many, many years now in my own cameras and such, without a single problem ever from them. So if you are left confused and worried about making sure you buy the right one that will work properly on the Switch, because yes, the labeling on microSD cards is a nightmare. And never mind the malarkey certain third-party sellers get up to on places like Amazon, for instance. Just make it worse. But yeah, the one in the link is the one I myself am getting. Like, it's arriving tomorrow. Should be anyway. Who knows? Couriers. But it's one I will be using in my own Switch 2 for performance testing and so on. So you can at least trust that one. And thank you. If you do use that link, I get a few cents kicked back to me for every time one of you guys buy that. And I use that gift card money from Amazon to buy our stuff. In fact, I use the gift card money from other Amazon affiliate links to buy this SD card in the first place because I'm broke. Bottom lining it. MicroSD Express is not just a faster upgrade to the old standard, it is completely new internally. It's like mechanically it's different, and thus anything needing the kinds of speeds it delivers is inherently incompatible with the older MicroSD cards you might have. So you do need, not just should, but need to buy a new one if you want to expand your Switches to storage. But there you are, I'm pretty sure that's everything you actually need to know. And a few bits of extra stuff as well, just for interest's sake. So what do you think? Are you ready to upgrade your Switch 2 storage at launch, like immediately. You think you need it at launch for your back catalogue of Switch 1 games off the eShop, many of which will get update patches for better performance, which take up slightly more room than they already do. Give this video a like if you learned something new, and hit that subscribe button, please, for more Clever Clogs stuff, or just, me. Thanks for watching. I am Blunty. I appreciate patrons very, very much for their above and beyond support, and I'll catch you next time.